So last week, we looked at a very interesting article which pointed out that those countries that we can consider to be late industrializers often took the route of implementing tariff barriers and protectionist policies. And in fact, we identified that even the United Kingdom, in its early period of history, had high tariff barriers, and only removed those tariff barriers once it had obtained an absolute advantage in most industries. So we looked at, and this might have surprised some of you at least, we looked at the United States of America, where tariffs were extremely high, 45%, between 45 and 55%. And of course, it's well known that Germany and Japan use tariffs, etc. So we looked at the fact that newly industrializing countries, where they're industrializing in the context of a world economy or of an economy where other countries have already industrialized and obtained an advantage in certain fields, sometimes need to protect their infant industries. This is, of course, known as the infant industry argument. So this we can also refer to as mercantilism, but we want to look at a new aspect of this, which is it is not only that countries that are trying to catch up with advanced countries may resort to protectionism, but even that in the instance where there is a global economic depression, countries may resort to protectionism. So I'll repeat what I said. The thesis here today is that previously we looked at two countries. One was an advanced country, the other was trying to catch up. And what we noticed was that the countries that were trying to catch up often had very high tariff barriers. Okay? This included the United States of America when it was trying to catch up against Britain. It included Germany, it included Japan, and so on. Now we're looking at a very different example where we compare periods of history, and we compare one period of history where everybody seems to favor, or not everybody, but a lot of people seem to be favoring the progressive lowering of tariffs. And then we look at another period of history where you'll see that the very same countries are now increasing their tariffs in response to an economic depression. All right? So let's get into it. This is an article called, this is a chapter, I think chapter 7, The Rise of NeoMercantilism by Sidney Pollard, who's passed away now. He was a labor historian. So first and foremost, just a straightforward definition of mercantilism. This was an economic theory and practice common in Europe from the 16th to the 18th century that promoted governmental regulation of a nation's economy for the purpose of augmenting state power at the expense of rival national powers. So how does Britain become strong? How does France become strong? How does Germany become strong? And what do we mean by it becoming strong? Its 17th century publicists, most notably Thomas Mann in England, Jean-Baptiste Colbert in France, and Antonio Serra in Italy, never, however, used the term themselves. It was given currency by the Scottish economist Adam Smith in his Wealth of Nations. So they never said about themselves, oh, we are mercantilists. But Smith wrote about them that these are mercantilist policies. So what was the argument? They argued that trade balances must be favorable, meaning an excess of exports over imports. In Pakistan today, we have all in a certain sense become, in that sense, mercantilists, that we all want exports to be high because we all recognize that that our import bills are too high, our trade deficit is unmanageable, we can't pay it back. That's why we have to borrow money from the International Monetary Fund. We're in acute economic and financial distress because we don't have enough dollars to meet our international obligations. So every economist is saying we've got to boost exports, and devaluation of the currency will automatically decrease imports. Colonial possessions, the mercantilists argued, should serve as markets for exports and as suppliers of raw materials to the mother country. That means that manufacturing was forbidden in colonies, and all commerce between colony and the mother country was held to be a monopoly of the mother country. So the colonies like India or China, which wasn't a colony but you could say it had a colonial sort of relationship with European countries, the idea there was that they are not going to do the manufacturing, we will do the manufacturing. they will provide the raw materials for us. That was the international division of labor according to the mercantilists. And the idea that the mercantilists had is that because international trade at that time was conducted in precious metals, namely in gold and in silver, then the central idea of the mercantilists was that we have to hold on to our gold. Why? What does that mean? That means that if I import more than I export, then the overall movement of gold will be out of my country. If I'm Britain and I'm importing more than I'm exporting, then the amount of gold that I'm earning from my exports is less than the amount of gold I have to give to other people because I have to buy the things that I'm importing. And so gold will move out of the country. So, or silver will move out of the country. So the mercantilists basically said, if you want strong states, you have to make sure that you hold on to your gold. That means you export more than you import. To do that, you could impose various tariffs, barriers, other bans and sanctions on imports in order not just to protect your gold and silver, but even to protect your infant industries from external competition that you arguably could not withstand. So that was mercantilism. What is neo-mercantilism? Pretty much the same thing, with the difference that this is a different period in history. So it's not that in terms of economic policy there's much of a difference. Neo-mercantilists also argue the position that countries should find some way to boost exports and reduce imports. But of course this is a different period in history, so we're not looking at the specific movement of gold per se. We might be looking at what happens with foreign exchange. So neo-mercantilism is a policy regime that also, as before, encourages exports, discourages imports, controls capital movement. We don't want capital to just leave the country, and centralizes currency decisions in the hands of a government of the state. The objective is to increase the level of foreign reserves held by the government, allowing more effective monetary policy and fiscal policy. So this is the sort of the central problem for Pakistan today. You know, that we just don't have enough dollars, we don't have enough foreign exchange, we don't have enough foreign currency. It's not that we don't have enough rupees, for example, but we don't have enough dollars because we cannot buy from outside in rupees, we can only buy in dollars. That's what we need. So here is just a picture of Alexander Hamilton, who was the first US Secretary of the Treasury. His ideas are credited with laying the foundations for American government and finance, and as I think you read in the previous class, he is also considered to be a protectionist and a mercantilist. So now, between 1850 and 1870 is a period that we can describe as one in which economic liberalism, the ideas, policies and doctrines of economic liberalism seem to be ascendant. What I mean by that is that there was the creation of large internal markets by the unification of Germany and Italy, and the post-1948 reforms of Austria. But more importantly, between the 1840s and 1870s, tariffs had been declining across European countries. Of course, the more advanced the country was, the lower the tariffs were anyway, and the more backward the country was, the higher the tariffs. For example, Russia had very high tariffs, France had high tariffs, United States of America also had high tariffs, but Great Britain did not have high tariffs, and so on. And as the country progressed, you would expect the tariffs would come down, but in this period, generally, you were seeing countries reduce tariffs with each other, and this was a period of good relative growth as well. Then came the Great Depression of 1873. Until the Great Depression of 1929, this was the Great Depression that had occurred in history. Of course, when the 29 Depression occurred, then they had to change the name, so they started calling it the Long Depression. Instead of the Great Depression, they started calling it the Long Depression. Why was it the Long Depression? Because although the immediate jhatka laga, the sort of first drop they got in 1873, they recovered from that. But over the next 20 years, nearly all the advanced capitalist economies seemed to stagnate. They were not growing anymore like the way they were growing in the 50s and 60s, 1850s and 60s. And this was true over Western Europe, and this was true over North America. United Kingdom was hit the hardest and in fact lost its lead to continental Europe. This is the period, of course, in which Germany comes up rapidly. This is also the period in which Japan seems to come up rapidly after 1880 especially, the Meiji Restoration and so on. Isse pehle Britain dominates the world global economy, but now they seem to be losing their place in it. In the US, from 1873 to 1879, check out the severity of this depression. 18,000 kaasi aa gayi, itna bada number hai. 18,000 businesses were destroyed. Okay, this is back 2 centuries ago. 18,000 businesses being destroyed back then is like the economy just getting liquidated. 89 railroad companies were bankrupted. 10 states within the United States of America completely bankrupted. Hundreds of banks completely destroyed. This is like a huge depression. Nobody had seen a depression on this scale ever before. And the other major thing is, people had seen national depressions, people had seen regional places, sort of get depressed, etc. They had seen individual depressions, obviously, I'm not psychologically speaking. But this was the first big international depression. World trade had become so combined now that a bad situation in one country would travel across the countries and destroy several countries. This depression, in fact, began in Vienna with the stock market of Vienna, and boom, it then traveled to Western Europe and the United States, and then traveled back to continental Europe. It just kind of ping-ponged like that. All right, so let's have first an estimate of what this depression did. Take an example, durable goods declined by 30%. Iron and steel declined by 45%. Construction declined by 30%. Overall, there was a 10% decline in production. That is absolutely devastating. Horrible, right? This is the run on the Fourth National Bank in New York, which is a huge, big bank. Banks were collapsing, production was declining, and you can see that this is an estimate of what happened in the United States alone. So the similar figures can be, cited with respect to United Kingdom and France and other places. So this collapse provoked protectionism in many, many countries. France, Germany, United States, they all said, oh my God, what is happening to our industries? They are being destroyed, businesses are being destroyed, banks are being destroyed. We need to save them. So they went over to protectionism. There was also mass emigration from other countries such as Italy, Spain, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. So tons and tons of people, hundreds of thousands of people said, our country is totally depressed, so we need to go somewhere else and find work. Much like what's happening in Pakistan right now, with 800,000 people having left last year. I think about maybe 1 million people will leave this year. I was just reading a figure that said that the number of people who are going to be thrown beyond the poverty line is something like 9 million, 10 million, some ridiculous number like that, can't even compute it, etc. It's so huge. So what are those people going to do? They're going to say, Puttar, ithe koi kam nahi hega, Vlad chala ja, apna Abu Dhabi, Dubai chala ja, kidhre bhi chala ja, magar idhar nahi ko kam hega, rozgar nahi hega. So this in turn led to the rise of nationalism. There was also now increased literacy that had its own impact. Political authority grew more strong, the state became strong. There was also growing state management of the economy, not just protectionism, but other things, etc. And there was a development of a more comprehensive and methodological tax system. And I'll show you how, in the final analysis, it culminated in the First World War. Oh, by the way, this is a poster. You can see Protection to Home Industry 1888. There's a poster over here, and this is from the United States. All right, let's have a look. So what triggered this depression? What caused it? So firstly, there was what we call the Latin Monetary Union, which came about in the 1860s, 1865 to be exact. And France, Belgium, Italy, and Switzerland agreed to combine gold and silver standard, that's what we call bimetallism, with a gold to silver ratio of 15.5 to 1 as established in the French franc. That's a lot to take in. Let me explain that to you slowly. So when you have gold in the form of, like a bullion, etc., you go to the bank and you ask them to mint that gold into a coin. All right, so they mint the gold. That's called coin minting, right? And the gold and the silver coin previously had no necessary relationship to each other. Gold and silver as a commodity, it was just the market that was determining demand and supply, that was determining how much gold will be exchanged for how much silver. But you can understand that where currencies are involved, if you have these two currencies, if sometimes you're trading with gold, sometimes you're trading with silver, if the gold and silver are moving constantly, then you don't really have a stable currency with which to do trade. You're always guessing which currency will move up, and then you're like, no, I don't want to buy in gold because gold might be going down. I want to get, you pay me in silver, etc. So it created this sort of currency fluctuation is not good for trade. So then they established, these four countries got together and they established that gold and silver will trade at this ratio, 15.5 to 1. That is what we're going to establish it as. In this manner, a French trader could accept Italian lira for his goods with confidence that it could be converted back to a comparable amount of francs. So international trade becomes easy because if I buy in gold or in silver, when I come back, I trade it back for gold or silver, it will be traded for exactly the same value. I won't lose any money, I might not gain any money, but there is a stability in that trade. So just understand right now that there's two currencies circulating, gold and silver. These are not paper currencies, these are actual gold and silver minted coins, and they keep fluctuating, and that creates problems in trade. So they said, all right, to get rid of this trade, to have some stability, we're going to link the two and just say that for every gold coin, you can get 15.5 silver coins. That's the rate at which at which the government will guarantee that they will trade with each other. So first, these four countries got together, these are the ones in red, and then associated countries also got together between 1866 and 1914 and accepted this standard. So these are the other ones that you see over here. Okay? So pretty much you can see now all of Europe accepted this particular relationship, 15.5 to 1. So now, what were the causes of the Great Depression? There are several causes, and we won't go through all of them. We'll go through some of them. There's American inflation. I'll cover that in a little bit. Rampant speculative investment in railroads, just like we had rampant speculative investment in the housing market in the 2008 currency crisis, financial crisis. Similarly, you had massive investment in railroad, and many of these railroad companies could not pay back their loans that they had taken from banks. You had the demonetization of silver in Germany and the US. I'll look at that briefly. You'll have economic dislocation in Europe from the Franco-Prussian War. You had great losses in the Great Chicago Fire and the Great Boston Fire, kind of like the floods we've had in Pakistan. They had fires, we had floods, etc. All of these are causes that can be identified with having contributed to the destruction of the economy in 1873. But mainly, it is the speculative bubble. Let's have a look at some of that. So in the US, before the Civil War, gold and silver coins were used as the official currency in the United States, okay? There were only some private banks that issued paper currency. The paper currency that was issued by private banks was guaranteed not by the government, but by the private bank. So if the private bank, for whatever reason, failed, then that paper currency would become utterly worthless. I put my gold or silver in a private bank, they write me a note, an IOU, on paper saying this much gold and silver has been deposited with me, this is your credit with the bank. Those notes could exchange within a local market. Sometimes the market could be bigger, sometimes the market could be smaller. But understand, this is a private currency, kind of like cryptocurrency today, okay? It's not regulated by the government, it is only regulated by the bank. It's kind of shocking to think about that, right? And the government itself is just saying, here are the coins, they are minted, they are silver and gold coins, although they're not exactly to the value. For example, if it's supposed to be 1 pound of silver, it's sometimes 0.86 or 0.9 pounds of silver. It's not exactly one-on-one ratio. Slightly, the metals have to be corrupted so that the coins are harder and better. Gold also has to be slightly corrupted in order for gold. 24 karat gold is useless. It's too soft as a metal. So to make it harder and all these sorts of things. So, but anyway, you get the picture that is what was being used as currency. Now, in 1862, you know what's happening in the 1860s, in the early 1860s? We have the Civil War going on, right? Huge war. Hundreds of thousands of people get killed in that war. There's economic dislocation, naturally. The money that was being made from the big slave cotton plantations, all of that gets disrupted. I told you in the previous class, Lincoln is very much in favor of protectionism and so on, right? So, huge amount of dislocation. And you can imagine what happens in war anyway. People are not engaging in production, they're engaging in war. It leaves the country devastated. So, in 1862, Abraham Lincoln issued unbacked emergency paper currency to finance the Civil War. So like private banks could issue their currency, Abraham Lincoln also said, we've got to pay our government, we've got to pay our soldiers, we've got to pay our people, we've got to win this war no matter the cost. Okay? So what am I going to do? We don't have enough gold and we don't have enough silver to pay all our soldiers and employees and so on. So what are we going to do? We're going to print money. We're going to print a new note. And the strength of this currency obviously would depend on confidence in the northern US government, in Lincoln's government. Now understand this, when this note is printed, the note is not guaranteed. The state does not guarantee that you will get this many ounces of silver for it or this many ounces of gold for it. It's a fiat currency. It's freely floating. You cannot go to the central bank and say, give me gold, give me silver, okay? It's just that you have confidence in Lincoln, you're like, I believe in Lincoln, he's put this currency out, he'll make sure that it stands solid. So every time there was a defeat to the northern forces, the currency would go down. When the northern forces would win, the currency would go up. Yeah, it's kind of strange, but because public confidence would go up every time Lincoln's forces would win, okay, Lincoln's forces are winning, therefore the government is strong, therefore the currency will work. If Lincoln's forces were losing, the government might collapse, in which case this currency will be worthless because the other people will take power. This currency will be not even worth the paper it's printed on. So you have gold currency, you have gold coins, minted gold coins. Next you have silver coins, that's another currency. And then on top of that you have this new currency which is just printed on paper, which is saying I guarantee, blah, 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 this, that, and the other, in God we trust and so on. But there's no gold you're going to get if you come to the central bank for it, etc. If you come to the Federal Reserve for it, etc. Right? And by the way, you have two forms of that currency as well. So, okay, there are two forms of that paper currency as well. We won't get into that. So you can see that the monetary situation, the money situation is quite complex and kind of crazy, anarchic even a little bit. So anyway, eventually though, these printed notes became what we today call the US dollar. Alright, so what was going on now with the new currency is that Abraham Lincoln is not only issuing this new currency and paying government employees and soldiers with it, but the new currency is also being used now to fuel industrialization, to set up factories, to set up railways. And in particular, railways was huge. This is like the age of railway construction. You construct a railway, suddenly the whole of that agricultural area opens up to the market. The market, of course, is in urban areas, right? All that you need to connect rural areas to the market and to get this rapid new supply of cotton or wheat or whatever else it is that you require is just to construct the railway. Once the railway line is constructed, boom, it's like a pipe from which all these commodities start to flow into a particular market. So railway construction is huge. Also, of course, it connects different markets with each other. Railway construction, very, very lucrative trade. In fact, the railway industrialists of that period used to be known as the robber barons of that period. They were called the robber barons because they used to make a killing, huge amounts of profit through speculation and so on and so forth. So anyway, these greenbacks now, this printed money, which is not printed because you have You could not do this before, but now you're just saying, I'm going to print all this money. I don't have the gold to back it up. I don't even care. I know you believe in me. And when I give you this money, you're not going to come and ask for gold for it. So here's the money. Go and buy whatever you buy. And when you go and buy, let's say, milk from this guy, because he looks like a doodh wala. I'm joking. When you go and buy milk from this guy for your morning breakfast, this guy also accepts, oh, Lincoln's money, yes, I accept it. So the only thing that's keeping it circulating in a certain sense is not the faith that you have that you can get gold with it, but just the fact that it's guaranteed by the government. And that's good enough for you to start trading on its basis. It's just like how in a prison system, people can also use cigarettes as currency. They begin to use cigarettes as currency. If you can use cigarettes as currency, you can use gold as currency, you can use silver as currency, and you might be shocked, keep your hat on, you might even be able to trade with people as currency. Yeah. Sorry? You could trade with people as currency, slaves as currency, women as currency, cows as currency, sheep as currency. All of these things have been currency. Of course, cows don't make for very good currency because you can't split them up, right? Well, you can split them up, but once you split them up, they kind of die, right? So it's not very good currency. Whereas if you split gold up, it still maintains its value, right? So that's why precious metals are good currency, because they don't lose value. They don't lose their quality. What was going on was that fluctuations in the relative value of gold and silver on the world market stressed the bimetallic currency union. All right, so whenever silver was discovered, suddenly the price of silver would drop. When gold, for example, was discovered in California, the gold rush, what happened as a consequence is that the relative value of gold in relation to silver fell down. Suddenly there was too much gold in circulation, not enough silver, too much gold, supply and demand. What happens when it's too much supply? It has to go down. So it went down. Same thing would happen to silver. So first it swung this way, silver became devalued, and then it swung the other way. It was swinging like this all over the place. Sometimes the silver was overvalued, then the gold was overvalued, etc. So this was a pretty big problem. Germany went over to a central bank directed gold standard in 1870. So Germany in 1870 said, silver standard is finished, khatam. Silver is no longer a currency. We're not going to mint coins. We're not going to mint silver bullions into coins. Silver is no longer currency. We only have one currency, and that's going to be, in terms of the gold standard, and that's that. Khatam. Now what happened as a result of that, you can imagine, is that the demand for silver suddenly went down. If Germany is saying we don't need silver as a currency, then you're only using silver to make rings and do the other things that you're doing. So the demand for silver goes down. Okay. Scandinavian countries followed in 1872. Holland followed in 1875, 1877. Austria-Hungary in 1879, and again in 1897. So as a result, the American government also in 1873 decided to withdraw the right of holders of silver bullion to have it coined into standard silver dollars. This is a silver dollar. Okay? They said we're not going to mint silver into these kinds of dollars anymore. They're not going to work as currency. You have your silver. You can have your silver. You can sell it. You can make a ring out of it. That's okay. And silver will have its value as silver does on the commodity. But it's not going to be a currency like this. It's not going to be a coin like this. So it can't be traded in the same way. Because now if I take just my raw silver and I say, दूध दे दो, तो वो कहेगा आगे से कि मुझे क्या पता अब इस सिल्वर में ये पूरा पाउंड है नहीं है, ये प्योर है नहीं है. वो तो government used to do that, so you knew that okay, this is a full pound of silver, this is a silver pound. But now if I take a silver thing and I say, look, it weighs a pound, please give me this much milk, you might say, sorry, it's not guaranteed by the government, so I'm not sure that it is. So this meant that basically this means that the United States government went over in 1873 to the gold standard. Now what's happening is all the countries, advanced capitalist countries, are switching. You can see the names here, countries and Scandinavian countries, Holland, Austria, Hungary, whatever. They're all switching from bimetallic, etc., to just the gold standard. Many Islamic economists tend to think that the gold standard is something that existed in the time of Hazrat Muhammad, peace be upon him. But this is the gold, this is what is meant by the gold standard. And this is when it was created. So this resulted in a massive contraction of the money supply. So suddenly now the silver dollars are not dollars anymore. They are just silver as a commodity. If you have silver dollars in your pocket, suddenly they are not a currency anymore. So a massive contraction of the money supply. So if the money supply, you can imagine, is in gold as well as in silver, suddenly all the silver is now no longer money. So the total money in circulation has decreased by at least half, maybe more. We don't know. I don't know. People will probably know, but I don't know the exact amount, but it contracted enormously. So now because of this contraction of the sudden contraction of the money supply, interest rates go up, farmers in debt are incredibly hurt, and the whole thing just completely spins out of control, and boom, there's a huge crash. Firstly, there's a railway crash. I don't mean that railways have crashed, I mean that the financial sector has crashed. Massive speculation and corrupt practices came to the fore in the railway boom of the 1860s, revealed only in 1873. So आप बड़ा complain करते हैं, इमरान खान कहता है वो बड़े ईमानदार लोग हैं, हम तो बड़े corrupt लोग हैं. He said that once, right? Democracy works in the West because they're very honest people. What are you? That's not true, right? They're just the same as us. When given the opportunity, they did massive amounts of corruption and secret backdoor deals and everything to make as much money as they possibly could. And that all meant that they could not pay back the loans that they had taken. The first nuksan is, you can understand, is a massive contraction of the money supply. Okay? With the contraction of the money supply, businesses start to go under. There's not enough money in circulation anymore. All this boom of the 1860s is kept alive, as I told you, with this money supply that is being expanded. An expansionary monetary policy. What expansionary monetary policy? The greenback money coming in millions of these printed dollars, etc., is being used to push up the money supply and to push up investment. Suddenly, boom, the silver goes out, money supply contracts dramatically, comes back down. Suddenly there's no money to go around. The gold coins are there, etc., but a big amount of the money that was in circulation before suddenly is just gone, right? So that causes an economic crisis. That was called the crime of this was called the crime of 73. Okay, this was the crime of 73, especially according to big railway magnates and also according to lots and lots of farmers who owned their debt in terms of silver or had money in terms of silver, and now suddenly found they had to pay back their debts in terms of gold, etc., and they were suddenly found themselves in huge debt that was impossible for them to pay back. Railway workers went on strike, farmers went on strike. They all said, this is a great crime that you have done against us with this new law that the silver is no longer money. Right, so speculation was that you have a railway magnate, a big capitalist who constructs railways. You invest into those railways and you are promised a certain rate of return, etc., and the rate of return is incredibly high, and also the railway construction is incredibly fast. The government is giving you all this credit. It's like, oh my God, Abu Bakr, we need a trans-oceanic railway line. Here's some money, go and construct it. He constructs it. He's like, look, I constructed this railway, invest in it, people are investing in it, boom, profits are going everywhere, dividends are going everywhere, etc., except the actual profit from the railway may not be so high. So then the railway guy cannot pay back all the money that they've taken from the banks. And when they cannot pay back the money to the banks, suddenly the banks discover we don't have any money for our depositors. And then what happens is that the people say, I put my money in the bank, you put that money in railways, I want my money back. Give me my money. It's my life savings. I worked 20, 30 years so I can save this money to send my kids to college. And now suddenly you're telling me you can't give me my money back? Why? They're like, sorry sir, we invested in railways, but railways is not paying us. If they pay us, then we'll pay you. Can you imagine the frustration people felt? People ran to the banks trying to get their money back out, etc., their life savings, and they were told by the bank, sorry, we can't do it. Banks declared bankruptcy. This is what happened in 2008. People put their life savings into banks, and the banks just said, sorry, we don't have your money anymore. Sorry, we invested it, and we didn't get back the money from the investment. Sorry, we can't do anything. That's it. Go home. Suddenly, पूरी जिंदगी की मेहनत आपकी खत्म. It's terrible. So anyway, so thousands of American businesses failed, defaulting on more than $1 billion of debt. At that time, $1 billion of debt was not a joke, right? Today, $1 billion of debt, like we're defaulting on $1 billion. But at that time, it was really huge. 1 in 4 laborers in New York were out of work in the winter and of 73, and nationally 1 million people were unemployed. Miserable conditions. You have to understand that when an economic crisis occurs, the straw that breaks the camel's back is not responsible for breaking the camel's back. The reason why the camel's back breaks is because of the weakness that has already come into the financial system because of the incredible amounts of speculation. Okay? And when the speculation cannot pay back, any small event can trigger a cascading depression. That's how all depressions have been seen. One second. So, even in the 2008 crisis, for example, the singular event that leads to the crash of the whole damn thing is always going to be either one bank or one investment bank or one company saying, oh, sorry, we don't have enough money to pay back our creditors or something. And then suddenly 20 banks don't have money to pay back. 50 banks don't have the money to pay. Nobody seems to have the money to pay back. So that's kind of what's happening, is that these speculative bubbles, make the financial sector very, very vulnerable. Now you may ask, if the financial sector is so vulnerable, why doesn't somebody deflate the speculative bubble? Because people are making too much money. They're making too much money to deflate it. You're like, oh my God, I'm making so much money. Why should you try to deflate it? You see? So that's what's feeding it. What's feeding the whole thing is you're making so much money, you are getting paid for it, and you keep investing and you keep thinking it's going to grow like that, and suddenly, boom, it collapses on itself. So where was I? So people unemployed, strikes ho rahi hai. You can imagine they're calling the police out, they're firing on workers, 18 workers get killed here, 4 workers get killed there, people are being arrested, chaos, blah, blah, blah. All of those things that you associate with the Great Depression occurred in 1873. Another big factor here is cereal prices. According to Paul Bayrock, it was the large sales of American cereals, cotton, and other primary goods to Europe, while the USA was preventing return exports of manufactured goods by high tariffs and did not invest abroad either, which plunged Europe into a deflationary spiral of a classical kind. So America is producing all of this wheat and grain and cereals and cotton, and it's selling it incredibly cheap in Europe. So as you see, in Europe the crisis is because of a different reason. In America the crisis is because of a different reason. The trigger is something different, but the cause is always the same, which is the speculation. So, so they're sending in all this cheap stuff, and that suddenly just plunged Europe into a complete deflationary spiral. Agricultural tariffs were particularly high in the large countries, in Germany, France, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Agrarian interests, in particular, landlords pushed for protectionism. They said, oh my God, all this cheap cotton, all this cheap wheat and grain, etc., is coming in from the United States of America. Block it, buy from us. Okay? So world prices of wheat fell by nearly 2/3. Imagine, food got so cheap. And transport costs dropped also to becoming totally insignificant now. Because transportation technology was improving in this period. So it became very easy for people to produce grain in Russia or in Hungary or wherever else, in Romania, and boom, just send it wherever you needed to send it. And it was there in no time. And it was really, really dirt cheap. So exports from the USA rose from an annual average of 46 million in 1869 to their peak of 166 million bushels by 1878. So you can see this is like a huge expansion of the export of USA to Europe. Exports of grain from Russia also were increasing. Over a third of the imports of food deficit countries of advanced Europe basically took their grain from Russia. Other food exporters were Hungary and Romania. So these are actually considered kind of like the backward countries, but now they're like pushing grain but making it so fast that when that grain comes into Europe, etc., into food importing countries, it causes a collapsing of the prices and causes another crisis. The large wheat supply in the late 1870s turned Europe protectionist. They went and they said, oh my God, we cannot import such cheap grain. It's too cheap. We can't take it because it will destroy our economy. So now tariffs start to go up. Early German rates were moderate, amounting to around 10 to 15% by value on industrial goods and 5 to 7% on agricultural goods. But they soon rose in the tariff of 1885 and 1887, by which time corn tariffs had gone up 5-folds. So they started taxing all the corn that was coming in. In France also, agricultural protection was raised in 1885 and again in 1887, and the comprehensive Méline tariff of 1892 constituted a new high in protection and destroyed a whole network of treaties that France had with other countries. In Russia, the decision of 1877 to levy duty in gold rather than paper rubles was equivalent to an increase of 30 to 33% in the rate of duty, and further increases occurred in 1881, takriban 10%, and in 1885, another 20%, partly in response to the rising grain duties in Germany and France. There was also a further increase of 20% in 1890, and the new Mendeleev tariff of 1891 had an additional upward tendency. The new Austro-Hungarian tariff of 1878 was still moderate, though double than the earlier ones. Other increases followed in 1882 and in 1887. The changeover was the most drastic in Italy. So basically everywhere you can see what happens as a consequence of when the world goes into a depression. Everybody starts to protect. Everybody starts to say, protect, 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 protect. Let me explain this. Why? If your bank or business or land, agriculture, whatever is going down, you're going to go to the government and you're going to say, Abu Bakr, kuch karo. Wahan se China se itni sasti cheezein aa rahi hain. Stop that thing, otherwise this industry is going to be destroyed. Today in Pakistan, if you pick up the paper, the Textile Mill Owners Association is placing ads on a daily basis saying, please decrease the rate of electricity and the rate of gas, because otherwise the entire textile industry is going to collapse. We cannot afford such high costs of production. Please reduce it. Why is the government not reducing it? Because the agreement with the IMF states that you have to raise it. So, stuck. खत्म होने की तरफ जा रहे हैं, फिक्र ना करो. The norm had now switched back to protection from the brief liberal interlude which had lasted less than 20 years. So this whole idea of the free market, laissez-faire economy, ये 20 साल चला. कब से कब तक? 1850 to 1870. उसके बाद ये collapse हो गया totally. Between 1875 and 1895, duties on manufactured articles in Europe as a whole had been at least doubled. Interesting. Here are some figures. United Kingdom by 1914, what kind of tariffs, level of tariffs they have? UK the lowest because they are still the market leader. Holland 4%, Switzerland, Belgium 9%, Germany 13%, Denmark 14%, Austro-Hungary and Italy 18%, France, Sweden 20%, Russia 38%, Spain 41%. You can almost grade these countries on their advancement. You know, if this is the most advanced and the less advanced and so on and so forth. The more piche you are in the economy, the greater the tariff duties. And now, because of the depression, everybody is imposing tariffs. So this is what we call the tariff war now begins. A tariff war begins. What is that? France waged a tariff war against Spain in 1882 to 1885. By the way, the United States and the People's Republic of China are today in a tariff war with each other. You can look at it, एक रेस करता है, फिर दूसरा रेस करता है, फिर दूसरा रेस करता है, फिर दूसरा रेस करता है, and so on. Right? So this has happened before. So France did it to Spain against Switzerland in 1893 to 1895. There was a German-Canadian tariff war in 1897 to 1910. And Austria and Romania conducted a tariff war which has lasted on and off between 1882 and 1898. This began with a tariff on Romanian grain levied by Austria in the interest of Hungarian landowners and also led to widespread supplanting of Austrian manufacturing export to Romania by Germany. A similar development occurred in Serbia about 20 years later. in 1906 to 1914 in the so-called Pig War. German-Russia Tariff War drove Russia into the arms of France and so on. So all the treaties that they had made and so on, when the Depression came, they all tried to protect their industries, all the governments. They tried to protect their industries, they tried to protect their landed interests, they tried to protect their economies, tariff barriers, etc. went up, and tariff wars began against each other. When these wars began, in countries that were being completely devastated, people started to move to countries that still had some economic prosperity, as will happen here in Pakistan. As poverty increases here, more and more people will be standing in front of embassies to go to the Middle East and say, there's employment there, send us there, we'll work. Same thing was happening in Europe. Polish workers could cross the frontier into German Upper Silesia for work. However, the Germans thought that this would weaken their eastern frontier. So the states thought, well, if we have all these Polish workers inside of our territory, and tomorrow we have a jhagda with Poland or we have a jhagda with Russia or whatever, then we will have a big number of Polish workers inside our country who might act as a fifth column. There will be a security risk. So we don't want these workers here. So they can come, they used to say, okay, you can come, you can work here, but then you have to go back. Every month or whatever, 2 months or something, I don't know, they had a period, and they said you have to go back home. So you would not have a permanent abode over there. And the German state even tried to Germanize its eastern region with eastern land ownership. They started taking land and said, are you German? Let me see your eyes. If you're blue-blooded, here's a piece of land. You know, kashtkari karo, so that you would have German settlement there rather than Polish or Russian or some other settlement. So this leads also to discrimination against a foreigner. It started becoming the order of the day. We don't want the immigrants coming into our country. Have you heard this before? Make America great again. Give the jobs to the Americans. Get the Polish plumbers out of the United Kingdom. Brexit from EU, whatever, etc. We don't want the Syrians, and we don't want the Turks, and we don't want the Muslims, and we don't want the Falana, and we don't want the Dhumkana. And these are all mostly countries that at other periods in their history have openly said, come to our countries, great work opportunities, come and work over here, send money back, etc., when they needed the labor. So now discrimination against foreigners becomes kind of like, starts to, if they had Twitter back in the day, it would start to trend on Twitter. Okay, same thing happening here, except they didn't have Twitter. Agrarian interests in particular begin to say German agrarian interests obtained ever tighter limitations and preferences. That means that they went to the state and they said, protect us, we are going under. These are the Junkers. You ever heard of the Junkers? The Junkers were the landed class of Germany, okay? Very powerful class, the royalty of Germany, based on land, the old feudal royalty. And they're saying, our estates are being destroyed and devastated by the cheap grain coming in from Russia. So put some barriers, protect us. Acha. So German agrarians obtained ever tighter limitations and preferences, if only at the cost of propitiating the industrialists with corresponding benefits also. Give the industrialists also benefits, but protect both of us. In order to persuade the many varying groups that the selfish interests, now here this is important, in order to persuade the many varying groups that the class interests or the selfish interests of the narrow Junker class represented the national interest as a whole ideology had to be developed. So what is the problem? The problem is you are a big landlord, Jagirdar. Okay, Jagirdars are only in the Mughal period. I mean, they're a Mughal thing. But you are a big feudal lord and you're being destroyed by Russian competition. Why being destroyed by Russian competition? Because the Tsar works his Russian serfs to the bone. Okay, they're like slaves. And he can work them so hard into such grinding poverty that he can produce this grain so cheap that he can still, even with the tariffs that the Germans imposed, the Russians could still sell the grain so cheaply because of the super low amount of money that, I mean, a super pathetic standard of living of the Russian peasantry. They could squeeze out that money and produce these really cheap products, which is what we're trying to do all the time. Let's squeeze the poor, nichod do unko, so that we can produce cheaper goods and export them and earn the foreign exchange to buy our Apple phones. Mind na karna. Theek hai na? Okay. But it's still not happening. It's still not working for them. So they begin to say, look, we are the folk Volkswagen ka suna na, the Volkswagen, they began to support literature that argued that an agrarian society had deeper moral and Germanic values than the immoral city and the commercial life with its Jewish value system. The author is not being anti-Semitic here, explaining the roots of anti-Semitism in Germany in the economic crisis of 1873 and following. So they began to say, city life, this is all about money. And the Jews are all about money. Why are the Jews all about money? Because the Christians said we cannot, the Bible prohibited usury. And the Torah prohibits usury, but to another Jew. So the Jews can give a loan to non-Jews. They can't give a loan to Jews. So all the people who go to the Jews to get loans. So they became associated with being loan sharks and so on. Although some of them were not. But anyway, so that's the Jewish sort of value system, etc., according to them. And the folk in the countryside, that's the real Germanness. Reminds me, in fact, of Heidegger. Anybody read Heidegger? Yeah, Mustafa? So Heidegger, if you recall, talks about the folk and going back to the countryside and working. In fact, he did go back to the countryside and he's working with his axe and he's saying, look at me, this is real Germanic spirit, the real Germanic national spirit, the folk spirit, this is about folk culture. But you see now that what's driving the process is really all of this at the back. Of course, most people don't know because they love Heidegger because he's such a cool existentialist, is that Heidegger, of course, was a Nazi and a card-carrying member and totally supportive of Hitler, etc., etc. So all of this now, what does it do? It feeds into the big war. Trade leads to war. In a previous slide, I also had a picture of Immanuel Kant and perpetual peace. I don't know if you caught on to that. But I teach this in Western political philosophy. And when I teach it, do you remember what is it about Kant's thesis of perpetual peace? To put it very simply, instead of fighting wars, let's trade. Trade will bring connections. When we connect it, it will build democracy and republics and all of that. And democracies don't go to war with each other. They trade with each other. They can have competition, etc., over trade, but that will never go into war. Well, Kant was proven disastrously and totally incorrect. And that the trade war is the actual foundation of the entire explosion in World War I. In 1914, which was the biggest war till that particular date in human history. Okay, that ends my lecture. Questions, comments, criticisms?